Jeffery Farnol was a British writer of romance novels and swashbuckling adventures, amounting to about 40 books in total. Born in Aston in Birmingham in 1878, one of two brothers, Farnol's love of books was fanned by his father, who read the novels of Fenimore Cooper, Dickens, Thackeray, or Dumas to their mother, an activity at which he was overheard by both Jeffery Farnol and his brother Ewart. Farnol wrote on the matter later on in life, "I can never be grateful enough to my father for those long, delightful hours when he, an excellent reader, varying his voice as the characters required, made the stories live for us." After leaving school, where he and his brother had won fame for their ability at fisticuffs, something Farnol would use many times later on in his romantic novels, his father packaged him back from London to Birmingham, making him take up work among a team of toolmakers in a firm of engineers and brass founders. However, his nature given towards conflict was not appeased under the conditions of screw-cutting while attached to a workbench, and he once again engaged in a series of dogged fights, ordained to climb a 120-foot tall works chimney for the sake of a 2-shilling bet. The men, following his success, refused to pay, and there was yet another tussle. Farnol was noted that on one day to have fought the same man on 3 separate occasions, being thoroughly licked twice until he finally managed to beat him on the 3rd time. But it was his hitting a foreman who had accused him of lying in the latter's subsequent and hitting of his head and his subsequent unconsciousness, which resulted in the termination of Farnol's engineering career and being sent back to his parents in London. There he tried to become an artist, entering the Westminster Art School, but reportedly he did not consider himself talented enough to succeed in the field, resulting finally to writing. He was then briefly employed by his father, but left and got himself married off at the age of 20 to Blanche Hawley, daughter of New York artist F. Hewson Hawley. This directly led to his new occupation as a scene painter for the Astor Theatre in New York. Farnol himself did not consider this a profitable occupation and proceeded to sell stories to American magazines in the meanwhile, the process of submission resulting in his chance acquaintanceships to O. Henry. Farnol kept on working on his first initial bestseller, The Broad Highway, while in New York, but several illustrious publishing houses flat out refused to publish it. Even the truncated version with 4 chapters removed, ostensibly to avoid complaints of length and excessive Englishness, was rejected following the 1907 panic, the so-called Knickerbocker crisis, where the New York Stock Exchange fell to about 50% of its worth compared to the previous year. A chance acquaintanceship, an actor who overheard Farnol's reading of The Broad Highway, took the manuscript to Boston, promising to show it off to his good friend who was a publisher in that esteemed city, but upon a chance meeting with Farnol 6 months later, he admitted that he had completely forgotten about the whole thing. It was only Farnol's wife packing the manuscript back to England to Farnol's mother, who asked a family friend to look it over, that finally resulted in The Broad Highway being published in 1910. After sales were initially stalling, the publisher began to pressure the booksellers to try and promote the book more vehemently, and this resulted in Farnol's very first bestseller. Farnol was subsequently exempt from conscription during World War I on account of his short-sightedness, but he wrote encouraging essays, later collected in his Great Britain at War. But even during the war, Farnol found enthusiastic readers, a certain soldier writing that, "The night I received it, I read over 200 pages of one of his novels," while another soldier wrote that after the war's close he should undertake a walking tour of Kent to visit the scenes of the Broad Highway, while a third wrote how his copy of this self-same book, and his insistence on carrying it on his person despite official orders to leave all extras behind, saved his life in Egypt when his copy managed to stop a Turkish bullet. In 1932, after already winning success with both his Highway and his The Amateur Gentleman, Farnol wrote an original collection of historical stories, not published previously in any newspapers or magazines, with a reincarnation theme whose full title is Voices from the Dust, being romances of old London and of that which never dies. The good lives on eternally, only the baser thing can die. The collection begins in the time of Roman Britain and details the tragic romance of Roman soldier Metellus and Freya from the Regni tribe. The first story, ending with the murder of Freya, begins with a theme of continuous reincarnation, romantic entanglement, and union between the souls of Metellus and Freya, each tied to some important historic place or item from British history. The first story focusing on the London stone, the so-called measuring stone that is displayed at present in the London Museum. Almost every story in some way has a man, almost always from the stock of the feudal lords of Brandon, tying all the way back to William the Conqueror's warrior aristocracy, meeting a woman and falling in love with her, oftentimes the memories of their past lives briefly coming up during their meetings, during spells of unconsciousness, or during extremely tense and stressful moments. And usually a relative of the male character, often called Brooke, either shows up as a romantic rival or at least is a bitter enemy of the male protagonist, endeavouring to kill him in some way, shape or form, either directly or indirectly. The one exception to this is the story of the peasant rebellion led by Wat Tyler in 1381, where this theme is not present or focused on over much. Yet, at times, the repetition of the central theme may sometimes be a bit much, but still the individual tales of this collection are well written, and after some 369 pages, one, at least myself, would not mind reading a few more of these tales, especially ones taking place in the early Middle Ages or even earlier. Especially one would have liked to see more tales taking place during pagan or Anglo-Saxon Britain, the latter which only gets focused on in its final death throes for immediately preceding and following the victory of William the Conqueror. Incidentally, each story also has an accompanying illustration, very detailed and very well made, by noted illustrator H.R. Miller, who illustrated books of such authors as Nathaniel Hawthorne, H.R. Rider Haggard, or Rudyard Kipling. Voices from the Dust is a bit of a rarity in these days, but it is still worth acquiring for some quaint British culture and some quaint historical British folklore.